Proof has been involved in a number of stereo shows where either they were intended to be shot in stereo or intended to be post-converted. In either case, we approach them the same. We typically just do mono previs to start with. You still need to lay out the basic framework for the sequence. You still need to lay out the basic story of what's being told and make sure that you're telling it in the most effective way that you can. And then we come in as kind of a second pass and drop in a stereo pair and start to render out the stereo. But it does, to be honest, I'm conflicted on the stereo thing, because in some instances I think it's great. It really lets the production see kind of what it's going to look like and how it's going to feel at the end of the day. But we haven't done a stereo job in which either the stereographer or the DP is really kind of invested in the process, that they're really there through pre-production while we're doing it. So in some senses, I feel like what we're doing is a great proof of concept that these shots will work in stereo, but I'm not convinced that we're quite getting that level of integration that we see where we're actually being able to make informed decisions about the stereo that will help the production. The other way to phrase that is that a lot of times the stereo work we're doing might serve great as visual reference, but there's no actual data coming out of it that is going to be used on set. So in some instances, I think it's kind of just being looked at, give it a thumbs up, but then they throw it away on set. And I'm still looking for those kinds of tools that would allow us to actually help make more informed kind of analytic decisions about how that stereo works and how they can achieve those looks in the final product. It's great. Certainly in the last few years with previs, it's really come to be an accepted and almost expected part of the filmmaking process. There was that time when the various department heads who weren't directly involved in the actual previs process would kind of stand off to the side and feathers be a little ruffled, feeling that their toes were being stepped on, because they weren't quite getting how this was going to benefit them and their jobs and what they were doing. But with the complexity of filmmaking today, and obviously we're talking about the bigger kind of visual effects tentpoles, and not even the bigger visual effects tentpoles, but even those films that have more modest budgets but are still big Hollywood films. All the other departments are often the ones clamoring for previs. That's been a change that's come up, and I've seen this in a handful of instances where the director might not be the one driving the previs, but it's often the department heads that might be pushing for it and really driving it, because they know that they need to get access to whatever the idea and the vision is that's in the director's head, and that the best way to get that out is through previs. So oftentimes what you'll see is, whether it's visual effects or stunts or art department, really kind of, or camera for that matter, really pushing for there to be a good previs effort on the film, even if the director isn't totally invested in it, because it's the most effective and the most efficient way of essentially eliciting that director's vision, so everyone can see it, so they know what's going to be expected of them on the day. Yeah, the onset work is to me personally, that's kind of an area of fascination for me, because I think that's where there's going to be the most radical transformation. I mean, it's obviously already started, and I think that it's going to, when we look back at filmmaking in 5, maybe even less than 5 years, people can be like, wow, we used to do visual effects that way? Seriously? Because, being able to take advantage of some of like the real-time onset compositing, the real-time onset visualization tools that are out there right now, allows the director and the DP to actually start to make on-the-fly decisions about their shots that they simply couldn't before, because they could never see it. It boils down to a simple equation of, if you don't have the information in front of you, if you can't see what you're doing, then your only choice is to make the safest decision possible, because you need to know that what you just shot works. So if you're shooting in an entirely abstract green environment, you can look at the previs, you might have done some shot planning beforehand, you can kind of nail down what you're going to do, but you're limited in the kinds of decision making that you can make on set because you simply don't have any of the visual cues there to make those decisions. And suddenly, with the virtual production tools, with the on-set tools, if the director and the cinematographer can see what is going to be there, and this is truly, kind of get back to like the root of, previs, as they're seeing what will be there, even though it's not there at the moment. And if you give them access to that level of visual information on set, then suddenly they can actually do their jobs much better than they can do them right now. They can start to free up the camera. They can start to move around because they have a really good sense of what's going to be there in the end, and they know when they've gone too far, they haven't gone far enough. You take a lot of the guesswork out of it. You allow them to be directors and be cinematographers and start to really make creative decisions on the fly. And if previs can allow the filmmakers to do anything, it's to allow them to be spontaneous on the day, and that would be a fantastic thing. One of the lessons I've learned working on recent productions has been that sometimes it is better to step back from realism. This has been something that previs, I think, has always struggled with, which is kind of how much is enough and how much is too much when you start talking about levels of visual detail. You can have a simple kind of room that's just flat shaded. You can have that same room with some basic textures to it to give it some scale. You can start to add in shadows. The tools that we now have available to us allow us to reach kind of an incredible level of detail and realism very quickly. So we can have lighting and shading and reflections, and this is all in previs. And just because you can have those tools, and just because you can add all those features, add all that detail into the previs, doesn't necessarily mean that you should. And we've had a number of projects recently where we've kind of gotten ourselves into a little bit of trouble because too many decisions were made too quickly, and suddenly our clients were distracted by the particular shade of red we used, when in fact we were dealing with much more fundamental issues of blocking, pacing, basic composition. Was the shot working? And so what we've been doing is looking for ways to dial back the level of visual detail that you see in the previs, but without making it simplistic. So how do you achieve a really kind of compelling level of visual sophistication without relying heavily on details and decisions that haven't been made yet? So when you're in the early stages of pre-production and the production designer hasn't quite gotten around to designing the room, we don't necessarily want to step on their toes and design a bunch of stuff and make a bunch of decisions about what might be there, but those decisions haven't been made yet. But we're trying to reach a level of visual sophistication. So we've been looking into different ways of creating, almost going back to like a hand-drawn illustrated look. Still with the same accuracy of 3D previs, we're still looking at fully 3D, dimensionally, spatially, temporally accurate work, but that has a little bit more of that evocative quality that you might find in drawings.